Hi everyone, welcome to tonight's yoga class. I'm Jennifer, I'm the owner of Auburn Yoga and Pilates, and tonight we are going to be doing a hip-focused yin and restorative class. So I hope you enjoy. If you have any pillows, blankets, a belt, please get them for the class because you'll definitely be using them. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to start off in a comfortable seated position. Some people can sit right on the floor and they're very comfortable. Other people, like me, prefer a little bit of a lift. So you can sit on a folded blanket or towel, or you can sit on a pillow if you'd like. Once you're there, lengthen your spine. Really think about growing as tall as you can through the top of your head. And then relaxing your hips so that your knees fall toward the floor and your shoulders. For some people, it's challenging to stay in this position without tightening the hip flexors. So feel free to take a blanket or blocks, something that can support under your knees if you feel like it's uncomfortable. And then we're going to inhale through our nose, all the air we can fit. And then exhale slowly out your mouth. And again, inhaling through your nose, all the air you can fit. Exhaling slowly out your mouth. And then one more time, inhaling through your nose, all the air you can fit. Exhaling slowly out your mouth. Now, try to keep the depth of that breath, but change it to a purely nostril breath. Coming in through the nose, out through the nose. So we've got that umbrella-shaped diaphragm at the base of our ribs. And you want to feel it rising and falling with your inhale and your exhale. Also trying to let your chest and your belly expand on your inhale and then contract on your exhale. Hopefully that you're able to notice that calming effect that a nice deep breath can actually have. So keeping that breath, and thinking about what you need to manifest into your day today. Maybe it's a little bit of calm, peace, maybe it's a bolt or a zap of energy. Maybe it's acceptance. Pick whatever it is that you need most. And then continuing with that deep breathing, closing your eyes, and trying to visualize yourself in a situation where you feel what you just said that you most needed. situation would help you to feel calm or accepting? What would you be doing if you got that jolt of energy that you were looking for? Whatever it is, really trying to make a detailed picture of it. And then adding more detail. What are the sounds around you? Are you outside? Do you hear birds chirping? Do you hear the branches rustling in the wind? And then any sense? Is there a specific smell or smells? And then just overall feeling, and then just staying here in this place for 2 minutes. Trying to make your scene more and more realistic. And then deepening your breath, bringing yourself back into the room and switching across those legs. Let's start to circle the spine. Try to wake up those energy centers in your back. Trying to keep the back flexible, strong. Exaggerate that circle as much as you can and move between flexion and extension. And then reverse direction. So if you don't generally do yin and restorative yoga, you may or may not know that it is a still and deep practice. So the poses that we'll be going into, we'll end up holding them for a while. Usually about 3 to 5 minutes for each pose. holding it in the center, and just a few lateral movements, reaching from side to side. So this practice should allow you to find more depth than you generally would in a pose. And of course, there's benefits to moving slightly more quickly, and there's benefits to stillness. Today we're going to try to experience that depth that we can find in stillness. And dropping it down and coming into child's pose. So you can come into a traditional child's pose, or if you like, you can make it a restorative child's pose. If you want to make it a restorative child's pose, you want to grab a fairly large pillow. If you have one of those body pillows, that would be great, or maybe a king-size pillow, anything along those lines. Of course, if you're fortunate enough to have a bolster at home, you could use that. You could use a sofa cushion in some cases, depending on the shape of it, but something that is fairly firm. It's not that it has to be hard, you just don't want it to be too squishy. And then coming down and resting on it. So you don't need to have the prop. You can, and some people would actually prefer a traditional extended child's pose. Or take your arms down by the side in a traditional child. If you have existing knee issues and this deep knee flexion bothers you, then you want to take a blanket and place the blanket at your knee crease, or a towel, of course, and that'll help. It'll allow you to go into the pose, but avoid that deep knee flexion. Now, I'm in more of a wide-legged child's pose than a traditional child's pose. Traditional child's pose, you would have your thighs parallel to each other. My knees are wider than my hips. For some people, that is a comfortable place to be. Sometimes it's more comfortable than a regular child. Whatever option you choose, you're really focusing on releasing your back, that area along your sacrum, that little triangular flat spot at the base of your spine. It tends to be fairly cement-like, and child's pose is a pose that does give a nice stretch to that area when you allow your hips to release. Allowing your sitting bones to move toward your heels. Sometimes in this pose, people will take a sandbag. You could always try it, anything that has a little bit but not too much weight. And sometimes they place that on their sacral area to exaggerate the release of the hips and the dropping of the hips. But a lot of the yin yoga practice is really about allowing. So you want to allow here. Sometimes we tense, so many times we tense. You know, we don't even realize we're tensing and we're tensing. We're tensing our back, we're tensing our shoulders, we're tensing our jaw. Allow, release, exaggerate those exhalations and really let yourself melt into whatever surface you're resting on. Whether that be a bolster or whether that be the floor. And just staying here about another minute. And then slowly, always slowly, coming out of that pose and coming into an all fours position. Lining up those wrist creases so that they are even with the short end of your mat, and then just move between a couple of cat and cows. So letting your pelvis spill toward the floor. And then switching directions like it was spilling up toward the ceiling. And then holding a neutral spine. Now, the next pose that we'll come into is frog pose. This is not a comfortable pose for everybody. So the option, if it is not comfortable for you, is to just return into a wide-legged child's pose like we just did. If you feel comfortable, you're going to take your knees wider than your hips, but you're keeping your knees basically so that they're even with the hips. So in my positioning here, my hips and my knees will end up being equally distant from the short end of the mat. Now with that, you want to keep your ankles directly behind your knees so that your shins are parallel to the short end of your mat. So yeah, in some ways it's almost like you're going into a little bit of a straddle pose, but not a full straddle. Now, what a lot of people do is, if this isn't a comfortable pose for you, then you could stuff a pillow between your legs and rest your hips on that. Or some people drop down to their forearms. Some people will comfortably stack their hands and rest their head rather, on their hands. Now remember, your knees are even with your hips, so your femurs, those big thigh bones, are parallel to the front of your room. And you have a perpendicular angle at each knee. Your ankles are straight behind the knees so that your shins are parallel to the side of the mat. Sometimes people need to put a cushion under their knees because they just don't like the feeling on the inside of their knees, it shouldn't be painful. If it's painful, you definitely want to find another option. But if you're in this pose, or if you're in some variation of this pose, you should find that it is opening your hips and thighs in a way that a lot of other poses don't. Now, of course, as we spend time here, the goal is to slowly release. Well, yin, the practice of yin, is about stillness. It doesn't necessarily mean frozen. So with that in mind, allow yourself to go deeper into the pose. You may find that you find more space once you're here. On the other hand, you may find that you were a little too, overconfident about where you would be comfortable, and that, this is not where you should be, then ease out of it a little. But of course, a pillow under the hips for support would be good. So great if you're doing this live, but remember, these videos, not only are they on Facebook if you want to replay them, but we've also been putting them up on YouTube so that they would be a little bit easier to find. We've got different playlists and things there. Staying here not too much longer now. Making sure those hips don't, sometimes the tendency is for the hips to come forward of the knees. Remember that the hips and the knees are about equally distant from the front. And then, again, slowly, ever so slowly, coming up and coming back into a table position. And then coming into a seated position. Now, I'm just going to give the disclaimer that I cannot model this next pose correctly. I tend to be tight in my hips, and it's not a pose that I can generally get too comfy in. Now, to make it somewhat manageable for me most of the time, I sit on a fairly high folded blanket or bolster. I'm going to show you a variation too that I'll probably end up going into, that if you have tight hips like I do, that you may find much more manageable. But what you're going to do is come into an all fours position. And then you're going to take your right leg in front of your left so that your knees are one directly behind the other. So you're trying to line up those knees so one's directly behind the other, and it's like your knees are hugging. And then from there, you sit back. Now this is the bottom half of an eagle pose. In yin, they call it shoelace. Now, the reason I say that I am not currently modeling this pose is because in an ideal world, my knees would be stacked, and you can see that my knees here happen to be staggered. Ideally, they're stacked, one on top of the other. In addition, my pelvic bowl is not level. My left hip is up over my right. Ideally, you'd want to try to bring length to both sides of your waist. I just did a little shift there. And it really lengthened my spine and lengthened my waist. So that's something that you're looking to do. Now, the other thing is that ideally this shin bone, this front shin bone, would be more at a diagonal back so that your shins would almost be making the shape of an arrow with your knee at that vertex and coming back nice and symmetric. Mind you not. So you can hang out here in the bottom half of eagle, again, also known as shoelace, or if this is a no-go for you, the modification to it is to take the lower leg and extend it, and then cross the upper leg over. And again, you're trying to bring that knee as close to sitting over the lower knee as possible. And you can maybe allow this shin to go back at a diagonal, like those sides on an arrow pointing forward. But just do what you can, whether it be with one leg extended or with both legs bent. And just staying here a little longer. Again, it should never be painful. You should definitely feel a sensation. I personally feel much more of a sensation in the hip and thigh of my upper leg than my lower leg, but sometimes people will report both. Some of it has to do with just how tight your hips are. And sometimes people have one side that is dramatically different than the other side, especially those of you who generally will drive a lot. Oftentimes your right hip is a little tighter than your left because of the gas pedal brake motion there that is supposed to tighten the hip a little bit. So from here, if your legs are crossed, you can just uncross them, go into the other side. If both legs are still bent, you can come back into that all fours position, and you can give your hips a little bit of a shake and try the other side. So again, sometimes it's not manageable at all. Sometimes it's manageable if you're sitting on a blanket. Sometimes it is better to extend the leg and just focus on crossing that one leg over. Remembering that whatever you're doing with your legs, you also want to be lengthening the spine. Try to level out that pelvis as much as possible and try to even out that waist as much as possible. Remembering you're bringing your knees as close to stacked as you can. And starting with the disclaimer from the beginning, mine will not stack. And don't feel like because your knees don't stack, you're not doing the pose right or you're not getting the full benefit from the pose. You are still getting the benefit. I do poses all the time that are challenging for my body and don't look anything, like they would in a yoga book or a yoga calendar. But it does not at all mean that I'm not getting the benefit from them. In fact, sometimes I think those are the poses I should be doing more, because they do require more effort and more work. But I still feel an opening through my hip and thigh, even though I am in the modified version of this pose. And that's, one of the great things about yoga is that pretty much everything is modifiable. If there is something that isn't working for you, then chances are there's another pose that's going to work for you. And then either coming forward into that all fours position and shaking those hips, or just lengthening those legs and shaking out those legs. And then coming into a knee down lunge pose. So if you are on a hard surface or you have sensitive knees, you may want to pad your knees. You may be perfectly fine without the padding. It's entirely up to you. From the all fours position, we're going to take our right leg and we're going to step it forward. And then we're going to take both hands to the inside of that leg. So I'm going to spin around so that you can see what I'm doing. So the side view, let me stay here for one more minute, is front knee, starting off at least over the front ankle, and you come into whatever feels like a reasonable knee down lunge for you. So, changing the orientation here, and if you have blocks, you may end up using them. You may not need them. So this is the front orientation. Your hands are here. Now for some people, your hands will not hit the floor. That's okay. That's where you can get books, you can get blocks, you can be creative. One of my college students told me yesterday that he was using paint cans instead of weights for his workout because he didn't have weights at home and he wasn't going to be able to go to the store to get them. So use what you have around your house and be creative if you don't have yoga blocks. So we're only going to stay in this, I'm going to call it high position, for about 2 minutes total. So we're not going to stay here that much longer. And if you wonder what I keep looking over at, it's because I have a timer next to me, because I would never be able to time, 3 to 5 minutes without it. Now, you may decide that here is quite enough. You probably will feel At some point, a stretch through your hip and thigh, along with the front of your hip on the other side, depending on how deep you go, through that hip flexor area. However, some of you will want to turn up the volume a little, and you're going to want to come down. Now, some of you will be able to place your forearms directly on the mat. For other people, that is not going to work. Also, before I said, your knee is over your ankle for now, because this is not a huge weight-bearing exercise on that front leg, if it is comfortable for you to have your knee fall out a little to the side, that's okay, only because the knee isn't bearing a whole lot of weight here. So I'll turn into a side view just to show you where I'm going. And again, you're finding the hip stretch for you. Front of the hip, outer hip on the front leg. And you can always come up if going down is too much for you. Staying where you are for just a little bit longer. So we spent about 2 minutes high, we'll spend about 2 minutes low. We are almost there. And then ever so slowly coming up. You can use those blocks or whatever you were using as stilts to help you take that leg back. You can shake out those hips. And then stepping that opposite leg forward, front knee over front ankle. And again, taking those hands to the inside of your foot. Now maybe your hands are down on the floor, or maybe they're up on something to give it a little bit of height. But easing into it. So there is something to be said about getting comfortable here, where you are, before moving into something deeper. It's like sometimes when you enter a new environment, you walk into a party or a large group of people, and you sort of stay on the outside, maybe, near the exit door, or off in a place that isn't too deep into the room, until you get comfortable with where you are, and then you find that it is a friendly, safe space, and you go a little bit more deeply into your environment. So feel free to stay here fairly high, or you can drop your forearms to books or blocks and go more deeply into your stretch. Remembering that if it's comfortable, that front knee can also wing off to the side. So oftentimes in yoga, we just call this a knee down lunge or a knee down crescent pose. In yin, they tend to call it a dragon pose, a baby dragon. And this is like a winged dragon when your knee goes out to the side, because it's like you're creating a wing. And coming up. And sliding that leg back, shaking out those hips. And coming into a fire log or double pigeon pose. Now this is another one that you may want to modify. It's another one that I cannot model like it's supposed to be shown. You want to take one leg and you want to line up your shin so that it's parallel to the long end of the mat. Now this is significant. This is the pose that if we were at Auburn Yoga and Pilates and you were in class, I would probably be walking around helping you with it, because it's one of the poses that people tend to go with what's comfortable rather than the proper alignment of the pose, which does have some benefit. So do not bring that foot in closer to the hip. Do not start to angle that shin at a diagonal. Try to keep the shin bone perfectly parallel to the long end of your mat if you can. And then you take your ankle bump directly over your knee, and that should land your knee directly over this ankle bump. So what people do, don't do this. What people do is they take that leg in and they kind of come into this position. In this position, you're going to miss out on a lot of the benefits of that hip opening. So please, please, please try your very best to line up your shins so that your shin bones are stacking one on top of the other, like my arms are right here. I can demonstrate it with my arms. Like a fire log. That's why they call it fire log pose. Now feet are flexed ideally, because that's going to help protect the knee and give you a deeper opening into your hip. Now if this pose is not for you, then what you want to do is lengthen that leg and lean back and then pull this leg in so that you're in a seated pigeon pose. This will give you a hip stretch, really only in the top leg, but you know, something is better than nothing. Now, the other thing that you want to watch in this pose is the placement of the foot. People do this, don't do this. Do this. You do not want to let your ankle sickle in this pose, because then you're going to overstretch those ligaments that are around your ankle. And the ankle is the most sprained part of the body. So let's not make it more susceptible to a sprain. Let's keep it strong. Put the ankle bump on top so that you're straight through your ankle. There's no compromise to your ankle here. And again, trying if you can to keep your foot flexed. So some people, I should have mentioned, some people, I have many people, and it's not even people who've always been doing yoga for years. Sometimes it is, but sometimes I get people who immediately, they come in, they get into this pose, and they are able to stack their shins right on top of each other without an issue, and they say, I don't feel a hip stretch. If you are one of those people, what you want to do is walk your hands forward on the floor. I'm not going to do it because I can't stack my shins. So I'm working on that. You know, 20 years and still going. And I'm not kidding. Yeah. Shows you that yoga is really a journey, and oftentimes the poses that are challenging for us, they don't take weeks, they don't take months, they take decades. This is improvement, believe it or not, over where I was 20 years ago. You know, still working at it. I am a work in progress. And then, lengthening those legs, windshield wipering them out, and we'll try the same thing on the other side. So again, making sure, get your shin bone perfectly parallel to the long end of your mat, or if you're not sitting on a mat, whatever wall you're facing. And then coming into that double pigeon pose, or remember, seated pigeon is an option. And if you want to see what seated pigeon looks like from the side, it looks like this. And some people can fold themselves up more, like an accordion, I always say. Find a place where you feel a hip opening. So we've been doing all these hip openings. And I think I forgot to mention, you know, why we do hip openings. Of course, hip openings are great for the hips, but our hips are so directly connected to our knees and our backs that hip openers help keep our knees and backs healthy. So they're important to do. We tend to hold a lot of tightness in our hips. And usually daily activities that, you know, we're just sort of doing don't allow us to stretch our hips and keep them strong and healthy. Keeping those feet flexed, keeping that ankle, that upper ankle straight, making sure it doesn't sickle. You don't want to overstretch there. when you settle into the pose and you let go of that, oh my goodness, what am I doing? And you say, okay, I've gotten somewhere. I feel some benefit, and you relax into that place. Again, you find you could maybe go just a little bit more deeply, but never push yourself. Your body will let you know when you can go further and when you need to hold back. It has, very good communication. Sometimes our conscious selves don't listen as well as we should, but when you learn to honor those messages that your body is sending you, you'll realize how truthful and authentic they really are. And then lengthening those legs and shaking that out. So coming into just one more pose before final relaxation. I hope you feel like time has flown by. We have been going about 50 minutes. I've been keeping most of the classes about 45 since we've been streaming online. And thanks for joining us. But this one, to get all those hip openers in, we needed to go just a little longer. So what we'll do is take something under your hips. Ideally, if you do have something firm, if not, maybe your firmest pillow, or if you can really roll a blanket tightly, like if you have a dense blanket and you can really roll it tightly if you don't have a block, you can try that. Now, if you do have a block, or if you do have a roll that you're making, you're going to decide if you want a little short roll, if you want a medium roll, or some people may want a high roll. I'm going to go with a medium. And come supine. And lift your hips and put the back of your hips, that sacral area, resting atop of the block. Again, or something as firm as you can get it to get the benefit of elevating those hips. So with this, you get the benefits of a partial inversion. And it's not a huge hip flexor stretch. This isn't like that baby dragon, that knee down lunge that we did. Much more subtle. But it's a release. We're constantly gripping our hip flexors. We're always sitting. This, no work, allowing those hip flexors to just relax. Now, you can most certainly stay here. Or some of you may want to exaggerate it and lengthen those legs a bit. Now, of course, when you lengthen the legs, now we've incorporated a back bend. So if it's too strong for you, put some bend in your knees. If you're comfortable, lengthen those legs, but try to keep your knees upward facing toward the ceiling. Sometimes they want to roll out. We want to try to pretty much keep those legs neutral, like if you were standing. It obviously does increase the lengthening here through that hip flexor. and bending those legs and planting those feet. Planting those feet enough that you can really root down through those feet, lift those hips. Drop those hips to the floor. And just windshield wipering those legs side to side. And then bringing yourself into a place for final relaxation. So for most people, they find a traditional supine position to be comfortable for them. Other people, if you have a tight back, you may want to put a pillow or a blanket under your knees. You want to turn your palms upward facing unless there's a reason not to. And you want to allow yourself to relax. This may be a time where you want to pause me and stay in final relaxation a little bit longer than we do in these streamed videos. We tend to stay longer in a traditional class. But with the power of video, you have the power to make it as long or as short as you want it to be. Your feet are generally wider than your hips. And your arms are somewhere up by your side. You find a place that seems appropriate. With each and every exhale, get more and more grounded. People talk about how yoga helps ground them. Literally and figuratively. As silly as it may sound, allowing yourself to relax and let everything melt into the surface that you are on. Letting gravity take over. Feeling more connected to that surface will likely help you feel more grounded. Hopefully you haven't lost that breath. Now, don't try to change it. Just observe it. And hopefully you notice that it's not just your chest moving up and down, but it is still also your belly. And that there's a calmness and a fluidity to that breath. And then again, either pausing to stay longer or starting to wiggle those fingers and those toes. Eventually, bending your legs, planting your feet. rolling over to one side. Finally lifting up to a seated position. The light within me salutes the light within you. Namaste. Thank you for joining me. We will keep live streaming ourselves through this time, and thank you all so much for your support. We really do appreciate it, and we can't wait until we are, back in person again too. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us. Have a great night.